I never imagined that accepting a temporary job taking care of a child would change my life forever. He called me mom on the third day. His father, a man everyone whispered about in fear, looked into my eyes and said I couldn't leave anymore. That I was part of them now. That I was his wife. Before I continue, tell me, where are you listening to this story from right now? And how old are you? Leave it in the comments. I'd love to know who's on the other side of this story. Now, let me tell you how it all began. I arrived at that house on a Tuesday in November. The sky was gray, heavy with clouds threatening to pour at any moment. I carried my small suitcase, the one I used for jobs that lasted barely a few days, maybe a week. Nothing more. I never planned to stay long anywhere. It was safer that way. Easier. No attachments. No difficult goodbyes. The agency had called me that same morning. Urgent voice, almost desperate. They needed someone immediately. A 4-year-old boy. Absent mother. Father who traveled for business. It would only be 5 days, maybe 7. They would pay well, very well, too well I thought when I heard the figure. But I needed the money. I always needed the money. The house was on the outskirts of the city, an area where properties had high fences, security cameras on every corner, and men in black suits guarding the entrances. The taxi dropped me off in front of a wrought iron gate. A burly man with an earpiece in his ear signaled for me to wait. He checked something on his phone, then looked me up and down with an expression I couldn't decipher. His eyes were cold, calculating. Finally, the gate opened with an electronic buzz that cut through the silence like a knife. The driveway was lined with bare trees. Their skeletal branches swayed in the cold wind that hit my face. I could hear my own footsteps on the gravel, each one echoing in the heavy silence of that place. I gripped the handle of my suitcase tighter, feeling my knuckles turn white. The house appeared before me like a modern fortress. Glass, steel, dark stone. All right angles and impeccable surfaces reflecting the leaden sky. No warmth, no home, just coldness and distance. Another person greeted me at the entrance. An older woman dressed in an impeccable gray uniform that seemed part of the house's architecture itself. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun and her lips formed a thin, serious line. She didn't smile. She barely looked me in the eyes as if my presence was something temporary, something that didn't deserve to be fully acknowledged. She led me down a hallway with marble floors so polished I could see my own distorted reflection. The walls were white, empty. Not a photograph, not a painting, not a hint that someone with memories or emotions lived there. Just whiteness, just emptiness. My shoes made a dull sound against the floor, accompanied by the firmer click-click of the heels of the woman walking ahead of me. We stopped in front of a dark wooden door. The woman knocked twice, soft but firm. There was no response. She turned the doorknob and pushed the door inward. The room that revealed itself before my eyes was completely different from the rest of the house. There was color, toys scattered on the floor, drawings taped to the walls, a rug with dinosaur designs. And in the middle of all that, sitting on the floor with his legs crossed, was he. A small boy. Dark hair, disheveled. Big eyes, the color of coffee when sunlight hits it. He was building something with wooden blocks, his face concentrated in absolute seriousness. He didn't look up when we entered. His small hands placed each piece with meticulous care, as if the world depended on that tower not falling. The woman in the gray uniform cleared her throat. The boy didn't move. She cleared her throat again, louder this time. Nothing. I felt something move inside my chest. A strange sensation like a soft but persistent pinch. I knelt on the floor, leaving my suitcase aside. The older woman made a sound of disapproval, but I didn't pay attention. I sat down completely, crossing my legs, getting to the boy's height. I waited. I didn't say anything. I just watched as he placed another block, then another. The tower wobbled dangerously. The boy held his breath, his small shoulders tensing. The tower stabilized. He exhaled. Several minutes passed in silence. The woman in the gray uniform still stood at the door impatient, but I didn't move. Finally, the boy placed the last block. He looked at his creation for a long moment, then very slowly turned his head toward me. Our eyes met, and in those eyes I saw something that broke my heart into pieces. I didn't even know could break. Loneliness. There was so much loneliness in those 4-year-old eyes that I had to blink to hold back the tears that threatened to form. The boy didn't smile. He didn't say hello. He just looked at me, studying me with an intensity that shouldn't exist in someone so small. As if he were trying to figure out if I would disappear too. If I was also temporary. If I would also leave him. I returned his gaze, and without thinking much, without calculating my words, I smiled. A small, genuine smile. The first real thing in that house of cold surfaces and empty hallways. The boy blinked, once, twice, then he lowered his gaze to his tower of blocks. The woman in the gray uniform finally spoke. Her voice sharp and practical. "This is Miss Anna. She'll be here for a few days to take care of you while your father is busy. You must behave and do what she says." The boy didn't respond. He didn't nod. He gave no sign of having heard. The woman sighed, clearly accustomed to this lack of response. "His name is Matteo," she said, addressing me. "He's 4 years old, he doesn't talk much, he eats little, he sleeps poorly. The instructions are in the kitchen, for any emergency, there are numbers on the refrigerator. Mr. Russo will be back on Sunday, maybe." That maybe hung in the air like a sentence. The woman turned and left, closing the door behind her with a definitive sound. And then it was just me and the boy. Anna and Matteo, 2 strangers in a room full of colors that couldn't hide the sadness that permeated everything. I took a deep breath. I looked around the room. There was a small bed with rocket ship sheets, a bookshelf with books that looked new, unused, with perfect spines, and not a single wrinkle. A tiny desk with crayons organized by color in small containers. Everything was too orderly. Too perfect. As if no one really played here. As if no one really lived here. I cleared my throat softly. "Hello, Matteo. My name is Anna. I like your dinosaurs." The boy said nothing, but I noticed how his fingers moved slightly, touching the edge of the rug. "I also had a rug like this when I was little." I continued, keeping my voice soft without pressure. "Although mine had elephants." "What's your favorite dinosaur?" Silence. I didn't give up. I got up slowly and walked to the bookshelf. I ran my fingers along the spines of the books until I found one. Dinosaurs of the Cretaceous. I took it out and returned to the floor, sitting down again. I opened the book to a random page. A Tyrannosaurus Rex roared from the illustration. Its teeth enormous and its eyes fierce. I made a sound of admiration. "This one looks pretty angry," I commented. And then so soft I almost missed it. I heard the boy's voice. "He's alone." I looked up quickly. Matteo was still looking at his tower of blocks, but he had spoken. His lips had moved. Those 2 words had come out of him like a whisper torn from a very deep place. "He's alone," I repeated softly. "Do you think that's why he's angry?" Matteo nodded, barely a movement of his head. My heart contracted. I moved a little closer, closing the book and setting it aside. "Do you also feel lonely sometimes, Matteo?" The boy didn't respond, but his hands stopped moving. They remained still on his lap, small closed fists, and I saw how his shoulders trembled slightly, as if he were containing something very big inside a very small body. I extended my hand, not to touch him, not yet. I just left it there on the floor, between us. An offer, an option, no pressure. "I've also felt lonely," I said quietly. "It's an ugly feeling, isn't it? Like there's a hole right here inside." I touched my chest. Matteo looked at me then. Really looked at me, and in that moment something happened. Something small but immense. A connection. An invisible thread that wove between us in that room full of toys. Nobody used and colors that didn't cheer anything up. The boy extended his hand. His fingers brushed mine. He didn't grab it, not yet. He just touched my skin, as if checking that I was real, that I was there, that I wasn't a ghost or a dream. I felt something break and mend at the same time inside me. I smiled, and this time my smile trembled a little at the corners. "I'm here, Matteo, and I'm not going to leave without saying goodbye. Okay?" The boy said nothing, but his fingers closed around one of mine. Soft, fearful, hopeful. And that's how it all began. The first days were a careful dance of approach and distance. Matteo watched me constantly. From behind doors, from the corners of rooms, with those eyes that seemed to contain more years than his small body had lived. I moved through the house carefully, learning his routines, his silences, the things that made him shrink and those that provoked the slightest spark of interest in his gaze. The house was a strange place, huge and empty at the same time. There were rooms that were never used, doors that remained closed. The staff was scarce and distant. The woman in the gray uniform, whose name was Mrs. Dominguez, came every morning, prepared food, cleaned with military efficiency, and left before nightfall. She never stayed. There was never conversation beyond what was strictly necessary. There were two other men, who appeared from time to time. Big guys, with slow movements but alert gazes. They stood at the entrances, checked the windows, spoke softly on their phones. They never fully entered the house. They never interacted with Mateo. It was as if the boy were invisible to them too. I quickly discovered that Mateo didn't eat at the big dining room table. That space seemed to scare him, with its glass surface reflecting the lights like a frozen lake. Instead, I prepared small plates and took them to his room, where we sat on the floor, on the dinosaur rug, and ate in silence, or with the minimal words that Mateo dared to pronounce. On the second day, while I was cutting a sandwich into small triangles, Mateo spoke. "Why do you do that?" I looked up. It was the first time he had initiated a conversation. My heart gave a small leap of joy that I tried not to show too much. "Cut it like this?" I asked, pointing to the triangles. Mateo nodded. "Because it's easier to eat. And because I liked it that way when I was little. My grandmother used to cut them this way for me." "Where is your grandmother?" The question was innocent, but loaded. I felt the familiar weight of grief pressing against my throat. "She's not here anymore," I answered softly. "She left a few years ago, but when I eat a sandwich like this, it's as if she's still with me a little bit." Mateo looked at me for a long moment. Then he took one of the triangles, and took a small bite. He chewed slowly, thoughtfully. "My mom's not here either," he finally said. "I know," I replied. "Do you miss her?" The boy shrugged, but his eyes became shiny. "I don't remember her much. She left when I was very little. Dad says she had to go very far away." I felt a wave of sadness so strong that I had to blink several times. I sat closer to him, leaving my own sandwich aside. "That must be very difficult for you." Mateo said nothing more. But when he finished his sandwich, he moved a little closer to me. Not much, just a few inches. But it was something, it was a step. At night when I put him to bed, I discovered something else. Mateo couldn't sleep with the lights off. As soon as the room went dark, his breathing quickened. He sat up in bed, eyes wide open, looking at the shadows with a terror that broke my soul. The first night I had turned off the light, and was heading to the door when I heard his voice. No. It was barely a whisper, but it was loaded with panic. I turned on the light immediately. Mateo was sitting up, clutching his rocket blanket with both hands, his face pale. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" "Not dark," he said, his voice trembling. "Please." "It's okay. It's okay." I returned to the bed and sat on the edge. "It doesn't have to be dark. We can leave a light on." I searched the room until I found a small moon-shaped lamp. I turned it on. It projected a soft golden light that filled the space without being too bright. "Is this better?" Mateo nodded, but he still didn't lie down. "What else do you need?" I asked patiently. The boy looked at me with those enormous eyes. He lowered his gaze, his fingers twisted on the blanket. "Can you stay?" My heart melted completely. I took off my shoes and lay down on the bed, on top of the covers, beside him. Mateo immediately snuggled against me, his little head finding a place in the crook of my arm. "I'm here," I whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." I felt how the boy's body relaxed little by little. His breathing became deeper, calmer. And there I stayed, looking at the ceiling, feeling the warm weight of that child against me, wondering what kind of life he had had to fear the darkness so much. I stayed until he was completely asleep. Then I slid out carefully, without waking him, and left the room, leaving the door ajar. That night, as I prepared for sleep in the guest room they had assigned me, a room as impersonal as the rest of the house, I couldn't stop thinking about Mateo, about his sad eyes, about his scarce but meaningful words, about the way he sought human connection but was afraid to fully reach for it. I wondered where his father was, what kind of man he was, What kind of business kept him so busy that he couldn't even be present for his 4-year-old son who clearly desperately needed him? Mrs. Dominguez had been sparse with details. She had only said that Mr. Russo was an important man, a busy man, a man who shouldn't be disturbed unless it was a real emergency, and that I would do well not to ask questions. But I wasn't one to follow instructions without questioning them when it came to a child's well-being. And that child, that little Mateo with his tower of blocks and his fear of the dark, was clearly not okay. The third day dawned with rain. A persistent rain that beat against the huge windows and turned the outside world into a gray watercolor. I woke up early as always and went down to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. The kitchen was the only place in the house that had some warmth. Wooden furniture, a small table by the window, plants on the windowsill. Mrs. Dominguez had left everything spotless the night before, but she had also left fresh ingredients: bread, eggs, fruit. I decided to make pancakes. Something comforting for a gray day. As I mixed the batter, I heard small footsteps in the hallway. I turned around and there was Mateo, standing in the kitchen doorway in his astronaut pajamas, his hair disheveled, and his eyes puffy from sleep. "Good morning," I said with a smile. "Did you sleep well?" Mateo nodded. He walked toward me with slow steps, slightly dragging his bare feet. "I dreamed about you," he said in a voice hoarse from sleep. "You did? And what did you dream?" "That you were leaving, that I woke up and you weren't here anymore." I felt a knot in my throat. I set the bowl aside, crouched in front of him and took his small hands in mine. "I'm here, Mateo. I came as soon as I woke up. I didn't go anywhere." "But you're going to leave later, aren't you?" he asked, and his voice broke slightly, like everyone else. I didn't know what to answer, because the truth was yes. In a few days my job would end and I would have to leave. But looking at those eyes full of hope and fear, I couldn't say that. I couldn't be one more disappointment in this child's life. "I'm here now," I finally said, "and I'm going to be here every day until I have to leave. And when that happens I'm going to tell you. I promise. I'm not going to disappear without saying goodbye. Okay?" It wasn't enough, I knew it, but it was the only honest thing I could offer. Mateo studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "What are you doing?" he asked, pointing to the bowl. "Pancakes. Do you want to help me?" The boy's eyes lit up slightly. He nodded more enthusiastically. I lifted him up and sat him on the counter. I gave him a wooden spoon and showed him how to mix. Mateo did it with absolute concentration, his tongue peeking out slightly between his lips as he stirred. We cooked together. I poured the batter into the pan, and he watched fascinated as bubbles formed and the edges browned. We made a stack of pancakes, some perfectly round, others with weird shapes that made us both laugh. We ate at the small table by the window, watching the rain fall. Mateo talked more that morning than in the previous 2 days combined. He talked about dinosaurs, and about space. About how he wanted to be an astronaut when he grew up so he could go to a place where everything was different. About how sometimes he felt like he was also in space, very far from everything and everyone. I listened to him, really listened to him, and with each word I felt how that child got deeper and deeper into my heart. After breakfast, since the rain didn't stop, we decided to build a fort in the living room. We used cushions, blankets, chairs. Mateo directed the construction seriously, explaining where each piece should go. When we finished, we got inside our creation, and I read books with a flashlight, making different voices for each character. Mateo laughed, a small and precious sound that I wanted to capture and keep forever. At some point in the afternoon, while we were reading, Mateo snuggled against me. His head rested on my chest, his little body warm and relaxed. I ran my fingers through his hair gently, over and over, in a comforting rhythm. "You smell good," Mateo murmured. "I do. Uh-huh, like cookies. And like when Mrs. Dominguez washes the clothes, but warmer." I smiled, though he couldn't see me. I kissed the top of his head without thinking, an automatic maternal gesture. And then Mateo said something that changed everything. "You're like a mom." The world stopped. I felt my breath catch in my throat. My fingers froze in the boy's hair. "Mateo," I began to say, but he interrupted me. "If I had a mom I'd want her to be like you." The tears came before I could stop them. silent, hot, rolling down my cheeks. I hugged Mateo tighter, my face buried in his hair. "You're a very special boy," I whispered with a trembling voice. "Very, very special." I didn't say more because I couldn't. Because my throat was closed and my heart was broken into 1,000 pieces. Because in that moment I realized something terrible and wonderful at the same time. I had fallen in love with that child. Completely, irrevocably. And I would have to leave him. That night, after putting Mateo to bed, I went down to the kitchen for water. I needed to clear my mind. I needed to think clearly. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mateo's face. I heard his words. "You're like a mom." I was standing in front of the window, looking at the darkness of the garden, when I heard a sound, an engine. Lights crossing the driveway. A black, elegant car stopped in front of the house. My heart raced. I looked at the clock. It was midnight. Who was arriving at this hour? I heard voices outside, the front door opening, footsteps, several pairs of footsteps, then a deep, authoritative voice giving instructions in a tone that admitted no reply. I stood still, not knowing if I should go out or stay where I was. The decision was made for me when the kitchen door opened. And then I saw him for the first time. Tall. Very tall. Broad shoulders encased in a suit that probably cost more than everything I owned. Dark hair slicked back, though some rebellious strands fell over his forehead. Square jaw with a shadow of beard that gave him a dangerous air. And eyes. God, those eyes. Gray like a storm. Cold like ice, but with something burning in their depths. He stopped when he saw me. His gaze swept over me from head to toe in a second, evaluating me, categorizing me, deciding if I was a threat or not. "Who are you?" he asked. And his voice was exactly as I had imagined. Deep, rough, with a tone that could be a caress or a death sentence depending on how he used it. "I'm Anna," I replied, lifting my chin despite the nervousness that made my hands tremble. "The agency sent me to take care of Mateo." Something passed across the man's face. Something very quick that I couldn't identify. Tiredness, maybe. Or guilt. Or simply recognition of a name he hadn't pronounced in days. "Ah," he said simply. "I came back earlier than planned." He walked to the refrigerator, opened the door and took out a bottle of water. He brought it to his lips and drank, his throat moving with each swallow. I couldn't help but notice the tension in his shoulders, the lines of exhaustion around his eyes, a small blood stain on his shirt cuff that he didn't seem to have noticed. "How is my son?" he asked without looking at me, putting the bottle away. "He's fine, asleep now. He's a wonderful child." That made him look at me. Really look at me. His gray eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that took my breath away. "Wonderful?" "Yes," I answered without hesitation. "Sweet, intelligent, sensitive. Although he's also very lonely." The atmosphere changed instantly. The man straightened his back, his expression becoming hard, dangerous. "He's not lonely," he said in a sharp voice. "He has everything he needs. This house, toys, food, care." I knew I should shut up, that I should nod and withdraw, that this wasn't my place to give opinions. But I thought of Mateo, of his sad eyes, of his nightmares, of how he clung to me as if I were a lifeline. "Material things don't fill the absence of people," I said quietly but firmly. The silence that followed was dense, charged. The man looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Fury, maybe, or surprise, or both. "You don't know anything about my life or what's best for my son," he finally said, each word measured and dangerous. "You're right," I replied. "I don't know anything about your life. But I know what I see. And I see a 4-year-old boy who's afraid of the dark, who barely eats, who barely talks, who clings to any show of affection as if his life depended on it. Things can't hug, sir. Things can't tell him he's safe." For a moment I thought he would explode, that he would fire me right then and there. But instead something in his face collapsed. Just for a second. Just a flash of something human, something vulnerable before he raised his defenses again. He turned around, giving me his back. His hands rested on the edge of the counter, his head tilting forward. I could see the tension in every line of his body. "I'm protecting him," he said, and his voice sounded different now. "Tired, broken. That's why I work. That's why I can't be here all the time, to keep him safe." Safe from what? From me, From my world. I felt a chill run down my spine. He had confirmed what I had suspected since I saw this house. These guards, this isolation, this man wasn't a common businessman. He was something else, something darker. Your son doesn't need to be safe from a dangerous world as much as he needs to know his father loves him, I said softly. The man let out a humorless laugh. Of course I love him. He's the only good thing I've done in my miserable life. He turned to look at me again. This time his defenses were a little lower. I could see the pain in his eyes, the fear, the guilt. His mother left because she couldn't bear what I am, what I do. And she was right. This is no place for a woman. This is no place for a child. But I have no choice. I can't walk away from this. And I can't risk Matteo growing up thinking this world is normal. Then teach him it's not. I replied. Be present, not just economically, but really present. Read him a story before bed. Have breakfast with him. Ask him about his favorite dinosaurs. Show him there's love even in the midst of darkness. The man looked at me for a long moment. Then he shook his head slowly. You don't understand how my world works. Maybe not, but I understand how a child's heart works. And his is breaking a little more every day. The words hung suspended between us. Heavy, true. What's your name? I asked, realizing I still didn't know. Alessandro. Alessandro Russo. I nodded. Alessandro. The name suited him, strong, Italian, with a touch of danger. Mr. Russo. Just Alessandro, he interrupted me. Alessandro, I continued. I don't know what I would do in your place. I don't know your circumstances, but I know your son, and he deserves more than what he's getting. Not more toys, not a bigger house, just a father who sees him, who listens to him, who tells him he's important. Alessandro closed his eyes. He clenched his jaw. When he opened them again there was a new determination in them. Show me, he said. Excuse me? Show me how it's done. Whatever it is you've been doing with him these days, I want to see it. I blinked, surprised. It's 3 a.m. Then I'll see it tomorrow. How you interact with him. What makes it work? Why? Because I've been trying to be the kind of father he needs for 4 years and I'm clearly failing. So if you have the answers, I want to know them. There was something broken in that admission. Something humble, and I felt my opinion of this man, this mobster everyone feared, beginning to change. Okay, I finally said, tomorrow. Alessandro nodded once, then he headed for the door but stopped before leaving. Thank you, he said without turning around, for taking care of him, for seeing him. And then he left, leaving me alone in the kitchen with my heart pounding hard and the feeling that something fundamental had just changed. The next morning I woke up to the gray light of dawn filtering through the curtains. For a moment I wondered if the midnight conversation had been a dream. But when I went down to the kitchen I found Alessandro there, sitting at the small table by the window, with a cup of coffee in his hands and deep dark circles under his eyes. He looked up when I entered. Good morning. Good morning, I replied, still feeling a bit surreal. Are you waiting for Matteo to wake up? Yes. His voice was softer than the night before. Less defensive. There was something vulnerable about seeing him like this, in more casual clothes, a black sweater and jeans, his hair disheveled as if he hadn't slept much. He usually wakes up in about 30 minutes, I said as I started to prepare breakfast. Do you like coffee? Alessandro looked at me as if the question was strange. Yes. Would you like more? He nodded. I poured fresh coffee into his cup, and then prepared one for myself. I sat across from him, the silence between us not entirely uncomfortable, but charged with expectation. He's afraid of me, Alessandro suddenly said. Matteo, he's afraid of me. I chose my words carefully. I don't think it's fear exactly. I think it's uncertainty. He doesn't know what to expect from you. When you'll be here, when you'll leave, if you'll be in a good mood or distracted. Children need consistency. They need to know the ground under their feet isn't going to disappear. Alessandro squeezed the cup between his hands. Everything I do is to give him stability. This house his security. Stability isn't just physical. I interrupted gently. It's emotional too. It's knowing Dad will be there when he needs him. That Dad cares about what he did today. That dad sees him as a person, not as a responsibility. Alessandro looked at me with those gray eyes that seemed to see too much. You don't mince your words, do you? I smiled slightly. When it comes to a child's well-being, no. Life is too short to beat around the bush. Before Alessandro could respond, we heard small footsteps in the hallway. We both turned toward the door. Matteo appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes with his little fists, his pajamas wrinkled. His eyes widened when he saw his father. Dad? The word came out like a question, as if he couldn't believe it was real. Alessandro stood up. For a moment he seemed not to know what to do with his hands. Then he knelt down, getting to Matteo's height. Hello, son. Matteo didn't move. He stayed in the doorway, his fingers clutching the doorframe. I slowly stood up and walked toward the boy. I knelt beside him. Look who came back, I said softly. Your dad got here last night. He wants to spend the day with us. What do you think? Matteo looked at me, then at his father. There was something in his face, a mixture of hope and caution. Are you going to stay? He asked in a small voice. Alessandro visibly swallowed. Yes, I'm going to stay. All day. All day. Promise? The word clearly hit Alessandro like a punch. I saw how his jaw tensed, how his eyes became shiny for a second before he blinked hard. Promise, he said, and his voice broke slightly on that word. Matteo took a step forward, then another. Slowly he walked toward his father. When he reached him, he extended his hand and touched Alessandro's cheek with his little fingers, as if checking that he was real. Alessandro closed his eyes at the touch. His big hand, full of scars, rose and covered his son's small hand. They stayed like that for a moment that seemed eternal. Then Matteo whispered something that broke my heart into pieces. I missed you, Dad. Alessandro opened his eyes. A tear rolled down his cheek, silent, unstoppable. He wrapped Matteo in his arms, lifting him off the ground, hugging him with a strength that was desperation and love mixed together. I missed you too, son. So much. So much. Matteo buried his face in his father's neck, his little arms wrapping around his neck, and Alessandro stood there in the middle of the kitchen, holding his son as if he were the only thing that mattered in the world. Because in that moment he was. I stepped back silently, giving them space. I felt hot tears on my own cheeks. There was something beautiful and heartbreaking about that scene. A father and son finding each other again, connecting through pain and absence. After a long moment, Alessandro set Matteo down but kept his hand on his shoulder. Are you hungry? He asked. Matteo nodded. What do you want for breakfast? The boy looked at me. Can we make pancakes again? I smiled through my tears. Of course. Do you want to help? Matteo looked at his father with hopeful expression. Can Dad help too? Alessandro seemed completely lost. I don't know how to cook. We can teach you, I said. Right, Matteo? The boy nodded enthusiastically. It's easy, Dad. You just have to stir. And so in that kitchen, with its gray morning light, Alessandro Russo, a man who had probably done terrible things and made impossible decisions, learned to make pancakes with his 4-year-old son. He got flour on his shirt. He burned the first pancake. He let Matteo laugh at his clumsy attempts. And with each laugh from his son, something in Alessandro's face softened. The lines of tension around his eyes relaxed. His smile, when it finally appeared, was genuine and completely transformed his hard face into something warm, almost young. I watched them from the side, my heart swelling with an emotion I couldn't name. This was what Matteo needed. Not a perfect house or bodyguards or expensive toys. But this, simple moments with his father. Shared laughter. Presence. We ate together at the small table, the three of us squeezed into a space that was normally only for two. Matteo told stories about dinosaurs while he ate, using his hands to demonstrate how they roared. Alessandro listened with complete attention, asking questions, showing genuine interest. At some point, Matteo spilled some syrup on the table. He froze, his face filling with fear as if expecting a reprimand. But Alessandro just took a napkin, cleaned up the mess, and said softly, "It's okay, son. They're accidents. We all have accidents." Matteo looked at him with wide eyes. Then a slow, beautiful smile spread across his face. After breakfast, Since the rain continued, Matteo dragged his father to the playroom. He showed him his tower of blocks, his dinosaurs, his favorite books. Alessandro sat on the floor, his expensive suit forgotten, and built with his son. He listened to stories. He read with funny voices that made Matteo laugh until his stomach hurt. I stayed close but not intrusive, ready to intervene if needed, but letting them have their moment. And as I watched them, I felt something new growing in my chest. Something dangerous. Not just love for Matteo, but something more. Admiration for Alessandro, for his willingness to try, for how he looked at his son with so much adoration. It hurt, for how his voice softened when he spoke to Matteo, so different from the hard, authoritative tone he probably used at work. At some point in the afternoon, Matteo fell asleep, his head resting on his father's lap, his little body curled up. Alessandro stroked his hair with gentle fingers, his expression contemplative. "Thank you," he said quietly, without taking his eyes off his son. I, who was picking up blocks, looked up. "For what?" "For showing me this. For reminding me what's important." "You already knew," I replied. "You just needed permission to act on it." Alessandro finally looked at me. "Why do you do this? This job, taking care of strangers' children, leaving before you get too attached." I stayed still, a block in my hand, the question hitting me in a sensitive place. "Because it's the only thing I know how to do well," I answered honestly. "And because every child deserves to be seen, deserves to be loved, even if it's temporarily." "And you? Don't you deserve to be loved permanently?" The question was too personal, too intimate, but there was something in the way Alessandro looked at me that made me want to answer honestly. "Maybe, but I've learned not to expect that. It's easier that way." "Easier, or lonelier?" I lowered my gaze. "Sometimes they're the same thing." The silence stretched between us, full of unspoken things. Matteo moved slightly in his father's lap, murmuring something in his sleep. Alessandro turned his attention back to him, but I felt something had changed. A connection had formed, fragile, new, but real. That night, when we put Matteo to bed together, the boy asked for both of us to stay. "Both of you?" Alessandro asked. "Yes, one on each side, like a people sandwich." I laughed softly. Alessandro looked at his son with such tenderness I had to look away. "Okay, little one. Like a people sandwich." We lay down on each side of the small bed. Matteo in the middle, radiant with happiness. His little hands held each of us, connecting us. "Will you tell me a story?" he asked, in a sleepy voice. Alessandro looked at me over his son's head. There was a question in his eyes. I nodded slightly. So I began to narrate, a story about a small astronaut who lived alone on a space station until one day 2 stars began to shine beside him, illuminating his loneliness. Alessandro added details, his deep voice mixing with mine, and together we created something beautiful. A story about connection, about family, about not being alone. When we finished, Matteo was already fast asleep, a soft smile on his lips. Alessandro and I stayed there for one more moment, watching him. Then very carefully, we slipped out of bed. In the hallway, with the door ajar and moonlight illuminating us softly, we looked at each other. "That was the best day I've had with my son in years," Alessandro said quietly. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," I replied. "You did all the hard work, you were present. That's what counts." Alessandro took a step closer. I could feel the heat emanating from him. The smell of his cologne mixed with something more masculine. More him. "How much longer will you be here?" he asked. "The job ends in 3 days," I answered, though the words hurt to say. "What if it didn't end?" I blinked. "What? What if I asked you to stay? Not as a temporary nanny, but as something more permanent?" My heart skipped a beat. "Mr. Russo." "Alessandro," he corrected. "Alessandro," I took a breath. "I don't know if that's a good idea." "Why not? It's clear that Matteo has grown attached to you, and I." He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "I also see something in you. Something this house is missing in our lives." I knew I should say no, that this was complicated, that he was dangerous, that I should follow my policy of never getting too involved. But when I thought about leaving, about never seeing Matteo again, about not seeing how this new relationship between father and son continued to flourish. My heart squeezed painfully. I need to think about it, I finally said. Alessandro nodded. Take your time, just think about it, please. And with that, he retreated to his room, leaving me alone in the hallway, with my mind spinning and my heart beating too fast. The next 2 days were strange and beautiful. Alessandro didn't leave again. He cancelled meetings, ignored calls, dedicated himself completely to being with Matteo. And without anyone planning it explicitly, the three of us began to move as a unit. We had breakfast together. We played together. We read together. Matteo flourished like a flower after rain. He talked non-stop, laughed constantly. His nightmares had almost completely ceased. He called me mom naturally, and Alessandro dad with admiration. He drew the three of us together at every opportunity. And between Alessandro and me, something grew too. Glances that lasted a second too long. Accidental touches that provoked electric sparks. Late-night conversations, after Matteo fell asleep, where we shared our stories, our fears, our hopes. I learned that Alessandro hadn't chosen this life, that he had inherited it from a cruel father and an even crueler uncle, that every day he tried to make his world a little less dark, to protect his son from the same violence he had known. Alessandro learned about my childhood, about how I lost my family in an accident when I was 17. About how I had dedicated myself to caring for children because it was the only way I knew how to create family without risking losing it permanently. We understood each other in a way that went beyond words. Two broken people trying to create something whole. Two lonely souls finding mutual comfort. On the morning of the third day, Matteo was drawing at the kitchen table. I was preparing lunch. Alessandro was reading reports on his tablet, but his eyes constantly drifted toward me, watching me move through the kitchen with familiarity. Matteo held up his drawing. Look, it's our family. I approached. On the paper with bright-colored crayons, there were 3 figures, a big man, a woman and a small boy, all holding hands, all smiling. My heart stopped. Sweetheart, I began to say, not sure how to explain that I wasn't part of his family, that I would have to leave soon. But Alessandro spoke first. It's a beautiful drawing, son. He got up and came closer, looking at the paper. Then he looked at me, and in his eyes there was something intense, something determined. Matteo, can you go to your room for a moment? I need to talk to Anna. The boy nodded cheerfully and ran off, his drawing in hand. When we were alone, Alessandro turned to me completely. Don't leave, he said without preamble. Alessandro, please, stay. Not just for Matteo, though God knows he needs you. But for me too, I need you. I felt tears forming. You don't know what you're saying. You barely know me. I know enough. I know that when you're here, this house feels like a home. I know that my son talks for the first time in years. I know that when I look at you, I feel something I thought I'd never feel again. What? I whispered. Hope. The word hung suspended between us. Alessandro took a step closer. His hands lifted, hesitated for a moment, then gently framed my face. Stay, he repeated. Stay and let this, whatever this is, become something real. Let me take care of you, like you take care of us. But your world, it's dangerous. I know. But I can protect you. I can keep you safe. And if you decide you can't bear it, if you decide it's too much, I'll understand. But at least give us a chance. Give yourself a chance to be part of something permanent. I closed my eyes. The tears rolled freely now. I'm scared, I admitted. Me too, Alessandro replied. But I've lived in fear all my life, and these last 3 days with you here I felt something different. Something better. I don't want to go back to how it was before. I opened my eyes and looked at him. I saw vulnerability in that hard face. I saw truth in those gray eyes. And I saw possibility. The possibility of a life I had always wanted but never dared to hope for. And Matteo? I asked. What do we tell him? Alessandro smiled, a small but genuine smile. The truth, that you're staying, that you're part of us now. I let out a sob that was half laughter, half crying. Okay, I'll stay. Alessandro hugged me then, strong and complete. I buried my face in his chest, listening to the strong beats of his heart. And for the first time in years, I felt I was exactly where I should be. When we finally separated, Alessandro kept his hands on my waist. "There's something else you need to know," he said, his expression becoming serious. "What?" "My world requires certain arrangements for you to be truly protected, for you to be part of this family legally and publicly. We would need to be married." I was breathless. Married. I know it's a lot. I know it's fast. But in my position, casual associations are dangerous. If you're going to be part of Matteo's life, of my life, you need the protection that comes with my name, with my ring. "Alessandro, that's crazy," he completed. "I know. But nothing about this situation is normal. And what I feel for you, what I feel growing in these days, isn't something I can ignore or leave for later." "You're not asking me to marry you for love," I observed, my voice trembling. Alessandro looked directly into my eyes. "Aren't I? Because when I look at the future, when I imagine the days to come, I can only see you in them. When I think about what I want for Matteo, it's having you as his mother. And when I think about what I want for myself, it's the chance to get to know you better, to earn your heart like you've already won mine." I couldn't breathe. This was impossible. Absurd. I was a temporary nanny. He was a dangerous man with a complicated world. We didn't know each other well enough for this. But then I thought of Matteo, of his little face lighting up when he saw me, of how he had called me mom, without realizing it, of how he held my hand when he was afraid. And I thought of Alessandro, of how he had changed in just 3 days, of how he looked at me as if I were something precious, of how his voice softened when he spoke to me. And I thought of myself, of the years of loneliness, of the constant goodbyes, of never allowing myself to stay long enough to matter. Maybe it was time to take a risk. Maybe it was time to stay. "Okay," I whispered, "let's do it." Alessandro's eyes widened with surprise and hope. "Really? Really?" But I added quickly with conditions. "Tell me. This can't just be an arrangement. If we're going to do this, if I'm going to be your wife and Matteo's mother, I need it to be real. I need you to see me, to listen to me, to be present. Not just for Matteo, but for me too." Alessandro nodded fervently. "All of that, whatever you need, I promise." "And I need time," I continued. "Time for this to grow naturally. I don't expect you to love me now, but I expect you to be open to the possibility." "I'm already more than open," Alessandro replied with intensity. "I'm already halfway in love with you, Anna. I just need you to give me the chance to show you." Before I could respond, we heard running footsteps. Matteo appeared in the kitchen doorway, his drawing still in his hand. "Are you done talking? Because I want to show Anna my new tower." Alessandro and I exchanged a glance. There was so much to say, so much to process. But for now there was a 4-year-old boy waiting anxiously. I wiped away my tears, and smiled. "Let's go, sweetheart. Show me your tower." But as we followed Matteo to the playroom, Alessandro took my hand. He held it firmly, with promise, and I squeezed back. That night, after putting Matteo to bed, Alessandro showed me a ring. It belonged to his grandmother. He explained, a strong woman who had loved fiercely and deeply. It was a white gold ring with a simple but beautiful diamond. "It's not ostentatious," Alessandro said, holding it carefully, "but it means something, family. Loyalty, love. It's perfect," I whispered. Alessandro slid the ring onto my finger. It fit as if it had been made for me. We looked into each other's eyes, and in that moment, we sealed our commitment. Not with flowery words or impossible promises, but with understanding, with hope. With the willingness to try. We got married a week later. It was a small private ceremony in the house's library, with a judge who didn't ask questions and 2 bodyguards as witnesses. I wore a simple cream-colored dress I had bought hastily. Alessandro wore his best suit. Matteo was between us, holding both our hands, not fully understanding what was happening but radiant with happiness because his favorite people were together. When the judge declared us husband and wife, Alessandro took my face in his hands and kissed me with tenderness. It wasn't a passionate or dramatic kiss. It was soft, promissory, loaded with respect and hope. Matteo clapped enthusiastically. Is Anna officially my mom now? I felt my heart break and mend at the same time. I knelt in front of the boy. If you want me to be, sweetheart. Yes, Matteo shouted, throwing himself into my arms. Now I'm like other kids. I have a mom. Alessandro wrapped his arms around both of us, creating a circle of warmth and belonging. And in that moment, in that library where they had just altered the course of 3 lives, it felt right. It felt like family. The months that followed were an adjustment. I had to learn to navigate Alessandro's world. The strange calls in the middle of the night. The mysterious meetings. The men who came and went with serious expressions and hidden weapons. There were moments of fear. Moments when I questioned my decision. Especially when Alessandro came home with new cuts or bruises he didn't explain. When he disappeared for days without much information. When I heard conversations in dialects I didn't understand about things I preferred not to know. But there was also beauty. Matteo flourished like a flower after rain. He talked non-stop, laughed constantly. His nightmares had almost completely ceased. He called me mom naturally and Alessandro dad with admiration. He drew the 3 of us together at every opportunity. And between Alessandro and me, love grew. Slow but steady. In the small things. In how Alessandro brought me coffee exactly how I liked it every morning. In how I massaged his shoulders when he came home tense. In how we stayed up late talking about everything and nothing. In how Alessandro looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching, with a tenderness that took my breath away. The first I love you came 3 months after the wedding. We were in the garden, watching Matteo chase butterflies under the spring sun. I had said something funny, and Alessandro had laughed. A true and complete laugh. And then he had turned to me, his expression becoming serious. I love you, he had said, simple and true. I know we agreed on time, but I can't keep it to myself anymore. I love you, Anna, completely. I had felt tears forming, but these were of happiness. I love you too, I had replied. More than I thought possible. We had kissed there, under the warm sun with the sounds of Matteo's joy in the background, and it had been perfect. Now, a year after that Tuesday in November, when I arrived with my small suitcase with no idea how my life would change, I was standing in the same kitchen doorway, but this time it was my kitchen. My home, my family. Matteo ran toward me, now 5 years old, with a new drawing. Mommy, look. I drew our whole family, you, me, Dad, and I also drew a little brother because I want one for my birthday. I laughed, picking him up in my arms. Little brothers don't work that way. Sweetheart, you can't order them like gifts. Why not? Matteo asked with genuine confusion. Alessandro entered the kitchen, loosening his tie after a long day. But when he saw Matteo and me, his expression softened completely. He came over and kissed me first, then ruffled Matteo's hair. What are my loves talking about? Matteo wants a little brother for his birthday, I explained with amusement. Alessandro looked at me, and in his eyes there was a question. A hope. Well, he said slowly. That's something Mom and Dad have to discuss. I felt warmth spread through my chest. The idea of having a child with Alessandro, of expanding this family we had created, filled me with a joy I had never imagined possible. Yes, I said softly, meeting my husband's eyes, it's something we definitely should discuss. Alessandro's smile was radiant. That night, after putting Matteo to bed with his new stories about the little brother he would someday have, Alessandro and I stayed on our room's balcony, looking at the stars. Do you ever regret it? Alessandro suddenly asked. Staying, choosing me. I turned to look at him completely. Never, I replied with total honesty. This life isn't what I imagined. It's more complicated, more dangerous, more unpredictable, but it's also more beautiful, more full, more real than anything I've known. You and Matteo are my home, Alessandro. I couldn't imagine being anywhere else. Alessandro pulled me toward him, kissing my forehead with infinite tenderness. I was a broken man before you, a shadow trying to protect a light I didn't know how to bring closer. And then you came, temporary or so you thought. But you stayed and you saved us, both of us. We saved each other, I corrected. You taught me it's okay to stay, it's okay to take risks, that permanent love exists. And it does, Alessandro murmured against my lips. I'll love you every day I have left. It's a promise. It's a promise I know you'll keep, I whispered. We kissed then, deep and true, under the stars that had witnessed so many love stories, but none, I thought, could be more unlikely or more perfect than ours. Inside the house, in his room illuminated by moonlight, Matteo slept deeply. No nightmares, no fear, just dreams of dinosaurs and space and future little brothers. Because he had what he needed most: love, family, home. And it had all started with a woman who arrived as a temporary nanny with a small suitcase and a heart that had learned not to stay. Until she found reasons to do so. Until a 4-year-old boy called her mom and changed the course of 3 lives forever. Because sometimes the best stories aren't the ones we plan. They're the ones that find us when we least expect them. They're the ones that choose us when we think we're choosing. They're the ones that transform us from lonely people into complete families. And Anna, Alessandro, and Matteo were living proof that even in the darkest worlds, love can shine. That even the most broken hearts can heal. That even stories that begin as temporary can become forever. Because she arrived as a temporary nanny. The boy called her mom. And the mobster said, "Now you're my wife." And against all odds, against all logic, it worked. Not because it was easy, not because it was perfect, but because they chose to make it work. Every day, with every challenge, with every joy, together. And that is the best story of all.